Hi everyone, I'm carrying on my look back at some of the brilliant blitz and rapid games we had in Croatia in the Super GM tournament that was just played. So this is Alireza Firouzja against Maxime vachier-lagrave. It's day 2 of the blitz, and there's always an added spice when these two encounter because they're both residing in France now. Alireza's got his French citizenship, and so he's currently number 1 on the classical ratings in France, but MVL's hot on his heels. He's held that position of number 1 for many years. So you've got the young guy coming up, the seasoned veteran, always interesting when they clash. So Alireza has white here. He goes knight f3. C5 rather from MVL. So he loves to play the Sicilian. He's inviting it if Alireza goes e4. But c4 in this game from Alireza, the English. Now we had knight c6, knight c3, and Alireza's now given black the centre, which Maxime takes with pawn to e5. And you can fight back for the centre already with pawn to e3. Then you're looking to go d4, stake your claim. But Alireza allows black the centre. He goes pawn g3. We had g6 from Maxime. Both players fianchetto. And now Alireza castles. Knight g to e7. Very flexible square, by the way. Maybe you're going to go d5 one day. Maybe f5. And now Alireza goes b3. So his whole idea here, in very hyper-modern fashion, is he wants to attack the centre from afar later in the game. He's saying to Maxime, okay, you have it. And in Blitz, the openings aren't so important, really. You know, it's all about the tactics and the clock. So Maxime now goes d5. You have to take that one. You can't get steamrolled in the centre. The knight recaptures. And now here Alireza makes an opening mistake. So he plays queen c2, which looks very natural, but then runs into bishop f5. But you should technically take this knight on d5. Now you bring the queen in, but then there's knight g5, opening the bishop. If the queen drops back, well, then you can go bishop a3. You start pressuring this pawn. I won't keep going with the whole line here, but you start to push b4 stuff at the right moment and just start to nibble away at the center, you know, try and get back some of that control, because otherwise you're going to stay squashed for the rest of the game. But what Alireza does here is go queen to c2. Now this runs into bishop f5, which MVL played, and if you go d3, which looks very natural, well, then black can just chop here, the queen recaptures, and it's just a very uncomfortable diagonal to be sitting on. And without, again, going too deep on the line, the problem here is that black can maintain these two pawns, get castled, the knight can come to d4, and it's hard to ever go e3, or then your d3 pawn is weak. So this is the kind of strategic problem with such a line. So Alireza doesn't want to go d3, just get squashed, positionally. So he goes pawn e4 instead, a more tactical move. He creates weaknesses, and it looks like you're winning a piece. But then there's this knight b4 move. So you pick up that tempo on the queen, then the bishop drops back, and after a3 from Alireza, kicking that knight, actually his tactical approach already pays off here because MVL plays an inaccurate move. So if he goes knight to a6, he keeps his opening advantage for the key reason that now if Alireza were to plonk a knight on d5, which we saw in the game, well, it's not interrupting the communication from the queen with the knight, which would be on d3 as we see in the game, and therefore you're not forced to take this one. You could go knight c7, challenge it, better game for black, better pawn structure long term. But in the game, we had knight d3, looks very natural, and now Alireza slams down knight d5, great move. The queen's actually threatening to take this one, and if you take here on c1, rook recaptures, looks like you're winning a pawn like this. But the problem is this beautiful knight takes on e5 move, the king still hasn't castled. So you can't take with the bishop, you lose your queen, and if you take with the queen, well, there's this classic skewer tactic, picking up the queen. So that's the problem with this whole knight takes on c1 stuff here. That's why MVL didn't do it. Instead, he took on d5, pawn recaptures, queen takes, and now knight e1 is the key move. Again, you open up this powerful bishop, and you threaten to win a piece here. So e4 is forced. Now we had takes here. The pawn can't recapture, of course, you lose your queen. So queen takes is forced. And now Alireza takes here, using the fact that the queen protects the bishop. These ones got exchanged off. Rook recaptures. And so we're in a fairly level position now. Material is equal. White has the bishops, but black has the better pawn structure. And now Maxime could go something like rook c8, defend this knight, different options. But he goes castle queenside. Both players want to fight here. He immediately activates the rook on this weakened pawn. And Alireza could look to simplify here. You know, he could take off, swap the bishops, just play a kind of dry position where both players are equal, both have pawn weaknesses, but he wants to fight. The Super GMs love their bishops, so he goes pawn b4 here, tries to get something going on the queen side. MVL captures. The rook now centralizes, hits this bishop, so Alireza defends, and he knows he's giving a pawn here because after f5, you have to retreat, then the rook snaps the pawn. But look at these bishops now. So he's opened them up. They're raking down the board. Plus the b pawn's coming. Plus this rook could be coming. So this is very dangerous now for MVL. And he goes wrong already here. So he should go rook to c3 as a decent move. The key point here is that then if b5, knight d4, and you've covered this c file for your king. Plus the knight sits quite well here. You know, it blocks the d file in some lines. Best way to play. But what we had in the game here was pawn to a6, covers the b5 move, but actually not really, because Alireza still pushes it, and now he's got this hook, this lever to rip open the position. So the pawn recaptures, rook takes back, and now here MVL blunders. So he has to actually go rook to e7. Defend this pawn, yes, but also step out of some really tactical issues along the back rank. What we had in the game was bishop to d4. And now Alireza had a shot here to just win the game on the spot. I mean, it's a sequence of moves, but the move here, and do pause if you want to look for it. I've maybe given it away, apologies if I have, kind of hovering over the bishop. But the move here is bishop takes on c6. So after the pawn recaptures is an unusual kind of idea, because you check down here, the king goes away, and then you check again to stop that king running away. Now if it crosses to the e file, well then you can check from e1 and you're actually picking up an entire rook back here. So when it then steps back here, well then you can bring the second rook, and it's just this slow motion threat of actually winning this rook here on e8 or checkmating the king. I mean, say now you tried rook to e7, well now there's bishop g5 skewering. Say you come all the way down, I don't know, to e2, let's say, looks aggressive here. Well, now you can check, king moves, check. And in this line, you're actually losing the rook then down the e file in this manner. So just none of the tactics are actually working. That rook is just very badly placed. And this is the problem for MVL. But Alireza misses that. This is Blitz. It's a tough tactic to spot. He wants to keep his bishops. So he plays the very natural rook a to b1, pressures down here, but now MVL just gets a breather. He can cover that pawn. The bishop hits the rook. It slides to c7. Now rook d5 played from Alireza, and this is a really nice move as well. So it cuts the d file, and say black got a bit casual, you know, pawn h5 for example, well then rook e1 comes, and this threat's actually really hard to deal with. Now say the rook moved to give the king room, well then check, this kind of thing, and you just start kind of chasing this king out. You know, looks a bit uncomfortable. White can go h4, secure their own king in a better manner, so not what you want. So this is why MVL in this position here, after rook d5, he thinks, okay, I need to alleviate the pressure here. He goes rook to d7, and he's actually giving a pawn here when he trades this active rook. So Alireza takes, then takes here with check. The king moves up, and he swipes a pawn here. So he is a pawn ahead, but it's a great practical decision from MVL, because then knight e5, and look how he's activated his pieces, just secured the king a bit more, and now he's the one with threats to check and knight f3 and that kind of thing. And here immediately Alireza blunders. So I'm sure he saw the best move to just drive towards equality, but he wanted to keep it complicated. He could have just gone, say, bishop f4. Now if check, we cover, And now this is how a line could have gone, pawn g5. If you take, by the way, the idea is this check. Even this gives drawing chances though for white, but you don't have to take, you could just chop here, and okay, should be a fairly level endgame, drawish really, even though white's got the extra pawn. So Alireza would have seen this stuff, but again, he's trying to keep it complicated, fight for advantage. So he goes bishop f1 immediately, he allows knight f3 check, king g2, and what he probably thought was, okay, you take me, I take your rook, and therefore you're in some trouble. But of course, at the end of this whole line, the knight takes the rook on h7, and you're just completely losing a piece down. So that's the whole problem here. So after king to g2, Maxime does take on g5, but Alireza can't pick up this rook here. This is a problem. So instead he goes rook h6, at least then he can pick up a pawn, but MVL is just a clear minor piece ahead now, but not so easy to win necessarily. So he goes rook c3, he goes out to the attack of the bishop. Now the rook took here with check, the knight covered, and now this defense by Alireza with only 9 seconds on the clock is really just phenomenal. So black has a threat here to be going rook e2, then be picking up this f-pawn, f4 might be coming at the right moment, but Alireza finds this move of pawn to f4. Now it opens up the king here, which looks horrible. Why would you want to do that? Well, at least now you haven't lost the f-pawn, and after the king moves, bishop g1, threatening mate here on this square due to the g-pawn, well then there's bishop g2, just shutting out the rook. Really nice calculation to figure out this whole setup. And so black now wants to bring the knight in. I mean, imagine if you could check from f2, for example, but it's not so easy to arrange. So the king moves first to come out of the pin, rook h6, now knight d4, and Alireza starts giving some checks here. Of course, he needs to keep that king moving around, and then he actually attacks the knight. He doesn't want it to get too comfortable, land on the right square. Now MVL ignores it for a moment, king f7, you can't actually take the knight, defended by the bishop. Now we had rook d5, the king came into e6, and the rook checked here, kicks the king back, and rook back to d5. So how is Maxime making progress? Well, he jumps the knight into f3 now, so you can't actually take this one, or then you're getting mated. So Alireza goes rook d1, attacks this bishop, and now MVL just plays a move which takes it to a drawn position. He can't actually really make progress here. I mean, even if you started trying to march the king all the way around and this kind of thing, Alireza can actually just wait along the back rank here. There's nothing to really be done. The pieces are just kind of tied up defending each other here. I mean, say you swang back, threatening mate in 1, well then you lose the knight. This is the problem. Because the rook left this rank, there's no more checkmate here. So Maxime plays this move here. After rook to d1, he just takes here on h2, giving that knight. Alireza takes on g1, knight g4 played, and now here Alireza has so many drawing moves. For example, you could just wait with the rook, let's say rook d1 or something, but after this move here of king to h4, it's just a one move blunder that hands MVL the game, because he switches back with the rook, he's threatening to checkmate here, and there's literally nothing Alireza can do. You just can't stop that trap from being closed, so Alireza simply resigned. So MVL took the game here, terrible one move blunder, and in the end they both finished joint second in this tournament. So a really big swing in this game which cost an actual second place for Alireza outright. I hope you enjoyed this game. If you want to see another amazing Alireza game, click here. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.